The way I've interpreted this statement is that this professor is insinuating that just merely shouting people down is weak, and actually you're a much better person with much more integrity if you kill them. It's a bit much. Alright everyone, I wanted to talk about something a little bit different today. This is a public status that I saw that was posted by a university professor called Steven Shaviro from Wayne State University in America. Here is what I think about free speech on campus. Although I do not advocate for violating federal and state criminals codes, I think it is far more admirable to kill a racist, homophobic or transphobic speaker than it is to shout them down. So there's quite a lot to unpack here. First of all, he says he does not advocate for violating federal and state criminal codes. I think that's a little bit of a weak disclaimer, especially when he then says it is far more admirable to kill. I mean, you've got freedom of speech and you've got murder. As you probably guessed, murder actually is illegal in America. In fact, it's illegal in most countries across the world. And he's not just saying that people should kill, he's saying it's far more admirable. And I think we should take note of the language that's used here, because that sort of language, as far as I'm concerned, is quite intentional. And if you think about it, shouting people down is a violation of their freedom of expression and their freedom of speech. America is the sort of country that explicitly considers having your speech suppressed to be an act of oppression. Actual oppression, not the woke oppression. I do think it's interesting, and by interesting I mean disingenuous, that he's framing shouting people down as not only the right thing to do but also normal. If somebody says something I don't agree with, my instinct isn't to shout over them. I've never shouted anyone down. The way I've interpreted this statement is that this professor is insinuating that just merely shouting people down is weak, and actually you're a much better person with much more integrity if you kill them. It's a bit much. Now let's move on. When Steven Shaviro throws around words like racist, homophobic and transphobic, I know from experience that what people really mean is people who I don't like, or people who don't kiss the arse of extreme leftists. That has been my experience. Those words are not thrown at people who actually are racist, homophobic or transphobic. The reason I say this is because words like racist, homophobic and transphobic get thrown at people like me just for stating simple facts such as humans cannot change sex. In fact, the first time I got called racist was when I said that men are not at risk of developing PCOS, which is polycystic ovary syndrome. It's an ovary disorder condition that you have to be a woman to have. And I was called a racist. I was also called a racist when I said that I think female toilets should be female only. So wanting men to stay out of women's spaces for the protection and the safety and dignity and privacy of women and girls is no different to racism. That's how these people think. As for homophobic, that's thrown around at everything. I've been called a homophobe for saying that men can't be women. I've been called a homophobe for saying that I don't think children should be sterilised. These are all things that are just completely benign. It's like calling me a homophobe for saying the sky is blue. All of these words have lost their meaning to me a long time ago. All I hear is,
you're the baddie. You're the baddie because you don't subscribe to my ideology. You're not worshipping at the altar of the gender god.
This sort of complete absurdity is a real indicator of where we are in countries like the USA and the UK today. It's complete upside down world. As far as the word transphobic, I struggle with this one a little bit because, like, first of all, take the word phobic. That means you're scared of something. You have an irrational fear. How can you have an irrational fear of something that you don't believe exists? I don't believe in gender identity ideology because I don't believe that people can be born in the wrong body. The reason I don't believe that is because it's stupid. In my opinion, there really is an attack on reality and common sense and normalcy in the UK and in the USA, and we're seeing it here with what this professor's saying. I think this professor is an extremist, no different to the radicalisation of religious extremism. The professor says, when right-wing groups invite such speakers to campus, it is precisely because they want to provoke an incident that discredits the left and gives more publicity and validation to these reprehensible views than they would otherwise attain. Okay, so which right-wing group specifically is he speaking about? Because of the nature of the fact of him not specifying, he's left that open to anybody who's right-wing who comes onto campus to speak. What's wrong with being right-wing anyway? I've never been to a university before. I'm not higher educated, but I always thought it was the professors, the other staff and the students who invite people to campus. So if right-wing speakers are being invited to campus, it's because people want them there. Surely those people have a right to hear this person speak without that person being murdered for being there. Again, I don't even know what's wrong with being right-wing. I come from the left. I used to be one of those people that just assumed that anybody who's on the right just is doolally and they're on the right because they don't care about poor people and they don't care about society, they don't care about poverty. That was my main issue. Like, people on the right don't care about poverty. And over the years, especially since being cancelled, I've come to learn that, you know what, they're people like us, and people on the right and the left typically have similar goals but different ideas of how to get there. But what we're seeing happen now is the left is going so far to the left and becoming so extreme and so radicalised that their version of the left is just outright ideological extremism. Anything and anybody that doesn't adhere to that is the enemy. I also always thought the point of being in university was to expand your mind and learn how to think and become one of the great thinkers in our society. Not necessarily. I mean, some people go to university to learn how to count more numbers or, you know, do some brain surgery and stuff like that, or become a teacher. But learning how to think and think for yourself and be independent with your brain and trust your brain, I would have thought that was a valuable thing to have in life, and that you wouldn't be able to expand that knowledge and that creative way of thinking if you don't expose yourself to views that might not align with yours. So I would have thought it was quite an important exercise at university to listen to speakers and debate speakers that you don't agree with, rather than to encourage your students to kill people you don't agree with. No, I thought it was really telling that he said that the right-wing speakers are only there to discredit the left-wing people. It's like, look, listen, dude, if you're that easily discredited that just somebody with a different view being in the mere presence of you discredits your stance, then maybe you're not as confident as you're saying you are in your position. Maybe you have to think about what your stance is if just the mere presence of somebody with a different opinion to you is that much of a threat. It's very strange to be of the opinion that anyone who's not on the left has reprehensible views. You don't even know what their views are, mate. Have you even spoken to any of the right-wingers? No, you haven't, because you spend all your time shouting them down and advocating for them to be murdered. People in the UK and in America who are on the left are unable to fathom that there's a world out there, a whole world of people who don't think the same as them. Oh man! Let's flip the script here. Let's think of the stereotypical right-wing guy who's a professor at a university, and let's imagine that he was saying
It's far more admirable to kill anybody who's left-wing who comes onto campus than it is to shout them down.
What would social media and the news be saying about this? This would be a outrage. This guy would have been sacked on the day. This would be all over the news. This would be the talk of the internet. It would be, there's a trans genocide. People would go absolutely bananas about this. They'd go blimmin' bonkers. To me, it looks like people on the extreme left have got away with this for far too long. And I think part of the problem is that people on the left that are normal, like normal left-wing people that aren't quite as extreme or woke as this, let them do it. They don't call it out on their own side. They don't say,
murdering people might be a bit wrong.
Hey, maybe you've gone a little bit too far with the murder thing. Steve, do you want to calm down, mate? Do you fancy a cup of tea? I don't know, mate. You know, take up a hobby, go bowling. Just not murder. Killing people is a little bit frowned upon in our society.
I mean, let me know what you think. The next thing that he wrote that I thought was really bizarre is he wrote, the protesters always get blamed instead of the bigoted speakers. It's not a protest, is it? Let's be honest. A protest, a peaceful college, university, campus protest, would be students holding signs saying things like, down with this sort of thing, I don't agree with your opinion and I love onions, whatever it is. We shouldn't normalise the involvement of shouting people down at protest, and then we especially shouldn't advocate for murdering people as a form of protest. It's a bit much. It really is unfair to call anyone you disagree with a bigot. The dictionary says the word bigot means a person who is unreasonably attached to a belief, opinion or faction, especially one who is prejudiced against or antagonistic towards a person or people on the basis of their membership of a particular group. Interesting. To use the language of the woke left, protesters getting blamed for their bad behaviour is really just a form of being held accountable, surely. And you know how much people on the extreme left love talking about accountability and how people should be held accountable for their bad behaviour. Funny how that accountability only goes one way. The university administration finds a perfect excuse to side publicly with racists or hope. I wonder what he means by side publicly, because my suspicion is he means that the university administration allows people who do not have extremist woke left-wing views to speak on campus, and he sees this as the university administration becoming an ally to the baddies. This is where we're at in society, really, isn't it? We see a bit of this in the UK as well, like that just by letting someone breathe near you, you are now endorsing every thought in their head. Even though you're not a mind reader, you are now contaminated with their wrong opinion. So everybody be careful with who you stand near and share oxygen near in future, because you could become a baddie too. Absolutely crazy. It goes on to say, the national and international press has a field day saying that bigots are the ones being oppressed, rather than the people. Those bigots actually hate being the victims of oppression. Okay, so the interesting thing here is that in Professor Steven Shaviro's mind, there are people and there are bigots. That's a little bit dehumanising, don't you think? How are people who want to suppress your right to free speech and advocate for your murder because you don't believe the same thing as them, how are they the victims? In short, every time protesters shut down a racist or transphobic speaker, they are indulging in their own moral sense of validity at the expense of actually strengthening the very bigots against whom they are protesting. I mean, yeah, they definitely are indulging in their own moral sense of validity. What I don't agree with, though, is that the solution to this is murder. The exemplary historical figure in this regard is Shalom Schwarzbard, who assassinated the anti-Semitic butcher Simon Petulura rather than trying to shut him down. Remember that Schwarzbard was acquitted by a jury which found his action to be justified. You know what that means, don't you? What Professor Steven Shaviro is doing here is he's insinuating to anyone who reads this that it's okay to kill people you don't agree with. I can imagine a young person would look at that and be susceptible to influence, potentially be under the impression that, you know, their university professor who they look up to is telling them that juries acquit this sort of thing because it's a justifiable, admirable, kill somebody that you don't agree with, especially if that person happens to be on the right. And I think it's sinister, really. There's not one part of this professor's status that ever once clarifies that it's not okay to murder people or kill people just because you don't like them or don't agree with them. Some will argue in favour of the professor and say that it shouldn't need to be said. I think that's ridiculous. What we're talking about is murder on campus. When you tell young people that it's far more admirable to murder somebody, what do you think that does to a young person who may be susceptible to influence by a university professor that they look up to? It's not good. I shared this screenshot of the status. I'll link it below. I tagged Wayne State University in it, and I also messaged them to ask them what their policy is on advocating for murder on campus. To my surprise, within a day, the university issued a public statement about it, and I was totally gobsmacked, to be honest. As far as I'm concerned, the people on this sort of like extreme ideological insane left have got away with this kind of rhetoric for so bloody long that I didn't think anyone would bat an eyelid at this. Kudos to the university administration, because they did the right thing here, and this is what they wrote. Dear campus community, this morning I was made aware of a social media post by a Wayne State University professor in our department of English. The post stated that rather than shouting down those with whom we disagree, one would be justified to commit murder to silence them. We have on many occasions defended the right of free speech guaranteed by the First Amendment to the United States Constitution. We feel that this post far exceeds the bounds of reasonable or protected speech. It is at best morally reprehensible and at worst criminal. We have referred this to law enforcement agencies for further review and investigation. Pending their review, we have suspended the professor with pay effective immediately from the President. Not the President of the United States, but the President of the university. So the university administration gave a brilliant response. I can't fault it. That was great. He hasn't beat around the bush or sugar-coated it, and it was swift. There was no back chat. What more can we want, right? And he's on suspended leave. I mean, I imagine this has caused a lot of problems for him. Now, I know a lot of people on my social media weren't too happy with the fact that he's suspended on paid leave. Personally, I'm okay with that. I'm fine with it. I think that's probably protocol at the university. I think that's probably normal. That will be up to them. That ain't up to us, right? I don't want any of my followers, obviously, I don't want any of my followers going after him. We're all too old for that shit, okay? Don't send him any nasty messages. Just let him think about what he's done. Let him think about whether or not he did the right thing. Let him think about that on his own at home. Let him explain to his wife and his kids and his family what he's done and whether or not they think that's okay. Whether or not they think it's justified for him to advocate for murder on a school ground. Let him think about that for himself. This is an outlook of the world where people you don't like and people you disagree with should be killed, and it's not okay. Some people are arguing that the professor was within his rights to say this, that this is his freedom of speech, this is his freedom of expression. If words are violence, then how come Steven Shaviro's words are not violent? And then, you know, some people are arguing that this is clear incitement to violence, which I agree with. I think it is incitement to violence. I don't know how much clearer you could get than saying it is far more admirable to kill people you don't agree with. So I don't live in America, as you probably guessed by my accent. It's not very American. Here in the UK, we don't have the same free speech protections that America does, okay? We don't see it the same way. If this professor was in the UK, what he did would be absolutely considered incitement to violence. The only problem we'd have is that our police is essentially a hired gang for Stonewall. They're more worried about protecting trans ideology than anything else, so they would probably be on this professor's side. The one thing the UK does have in common in that respect with America is our hypocrisy when it comes to left-wing extremism, because I do think people on the left who are radicalised in this way act as if they're above the law, and the reason they do that is because, well, they essentially are above the law. It just is what it is. That's where we're at the moment, because people seem to be okay with it. I thought about the fact that some of you might criticise me for engaging in some sort of cancel culture behaviour, and I wanted to talk about that as well, because I do think there's a difference between going after somebody's job, threatening to kill them, threatening to going after their friends, going after their families, threatening to beat them up, making their lives hell just because they don't believe in a religion, and alerting a university and the public to something that a professor has publicly said that advocates for murder on a school campus. There's a big difference. I'm going to keep my eye on this story for updates, of course, and I will post more about it. I don't know what should happen to the university professor. I personally think if he did get fired for violating the school policy, that's on him. That really is on him. He's been working as professor for long enough, over 20 years by the looks of it. That's on you, mate. You advocated for murder on a school campus in a country where there are things like school shootings happening, and it's a frightening time for the parents and students. That's on you. Take responsibility, yeah? Take responsibility. Let me know in the comments what you think. What should happen to this professor? Do you think he should be fired? Do you think that just having a suspension and a warning is enough? Do you think he should be allowed back on campus? Do you think he should be allowed to teach somewhere else? Do you think he should be made to apologise and that would be alright? What do you think? What do you think should happen? Or do you think this is his right to free speech and nothing should happen to him, and people like me are just being ridiculous, so it's just blown out of proportion? Let me know in the comments. My conclusion is, and I never thought I'd have to say this, don't murder people. See you later.
Early in the morning, as the sun comes up, I just wanna have a cup. There's one drink, that's the one for me. Won't you please make me a cup of tea?